All right. Well, Olaf, thanks for joining me on the podcast. It's good to have you on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good to be on.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to talk to you because growing up as a goalie in the '90s, I don't know why, but it seemed like every time I turned on ESPN, it was either the Flyers or the Capitals on. So I got to watch a lot of you as a young impressionable goalie, and I didn't realize it until I was watching some highlight videos. I always thought my game was somewhat modeled after Cujo because deep in the net, very, responsive. But it wasn't until I was watching some of the videos of you that I went, you know what? I think my game is more like Kolzig's in that it's, very much butterfly first, but never give up on the play. You're never out of it, but at the same time, quite flexible and kind of cheating on breakaways, forcing the guy to go cross net and pull out that split save.
Yeah, it worked. It worked most of the time, except for when Merrick Malik did it to me in the shootout back in 2005.
Yeah,
I was
but
never, I was never, I was never accused of playing deep in my net.
no, and that's probably where you and I differ. And why I always thought maybe I was more like Cujo is because I was a little deeper in the net. But yeah, you were always out there, not on top of your crease, but out of your crease.
Well, back in those days, you could afford to play that way because I mean there was so much clutching and grabbing, and you could just
Mm-hmm.
focus on the shooter and know that the D man had the guy tied up. So there's no way that you could play that kind of style in today's game.
No, you couldn't. But when we look at your career, I mean, 14 years in the NHL, 13 of them with Washington. Um, but I think what's really unique about you is, you weren't one of these goalies that they rushed up. You matured in the minor leagues, very much like Corey Crawford did, and he went on to have a great career like yourself. Um, but I don't know why we don't see more of that with young goalies, where we see them, spend a few years in the minors and learn that pro game. Do you think it was good for you to spend those years, or do you think you could have come up sooner?
I think I probably could have came up a little sooner. I mean, 6, 7 years is kind of pushing it. I was fortunate. I had a very patient organization, and they believed in me. But you can't do that nowadays in the salary cap era. Organizations want cost certainty, and
Hmm.
I think that's why young guys are getting rushed up more and more. Is that they can't they need them to play right away. Um,
Right.
and really the only young guy you can say that really did that was Marc-Andre Fleury, where he
Hmm.
maybe spent a little bit of time in Wilkes-Barre, but then came right up and had instant success. But Carter Hart had some struggles after a really good year. Matt Murray had some struggles after a couple good years. It's a tough jump, and I think you have to learn the pro game. There's going to be a lot of ups and downs, and as an athlete, you need to be able to um, uh, keep your mountains low and your valleys high. Is what I always like to tell my prospects. And once you can do that and have those tools to be able to not get too excited when things are going good or get too down when things are going bad, I think that's when you play your most consistent goal.
Well, and it's funny because as a Blackhawks fan, I keep watching the Blackhawks, and they're trying to let Arvid Soderblom kind of mature in the minors, but every time he starts to go on a roll, they get injuries, and they got to bring him up. And now he's been playing, had a nice game against Jersey 2 nights ago, I think it was that I watched it. But they're trying to go that relaxed route with them and let them learn that game. And same thing. Um, they got that other goalie at Boston playing for Brian DeCord right now. Oh God, its name's slipping me, but some organizations are trying to go that route where I think the Hawks can get away with it. They're in the middle of a rebuild, so if they don't want to rush anybody up and throw them to the fire. I think
And
they
that's
saw
the
that with
thing. If you're in an
Delia.
organization, if you're in an organization that realistically isn't going to compete for a cup, then you should bring them along slowly. And obviously there are injuries, and then that's when you bring them up for a taste and see how they're progressing. But then send them back, regardless of the success they have. send them back. And
Mm-hmm.
over time, what happens is these athletes, they don't want to get sent down anymore because they've gotten
Right.
such a taste of the NHL. It's the kids that you bring that start out right away, that you have up there for a while, that you send down. Then you start having problems with these kids because they don't believe they should be down there, and they come down with the wrong attitude, and so it becomes a bit of a coach's nightmare. But I think, and Detroit did it for the longest time when Kenny Holland was there. They would never give their young guys a chance in the NHL right away. They had to play a minimum of 1 year in the minors, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that was smart. And I think that you really get an appreciation when you do finally make it, that you don't want to go back. And I know that's what happened to me when I finally got my shot. I wasn't happy with just being there. I wanted to stay there, and so
Mm-hmm.
I took every day of practice and games like they were going to be my last, and I had to make an impression, and because I didn't want to go back to the minors. I'd spent enough time down there.
Yeah, I forget which goalie it was. It said anybody can make it to the NHL, but not everybody can stay there.
Well, yeah. We say anybody can make the NHL, but it's the staying there is the tougher thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. Your background, some people know about it, but I would say you're Canadian by experience, but you were born in South Africa to some German parents, and then moved to Canada as a teenager. So how in South Africa did you learn about this great game of hockey and start playing it when it's not really the big sport down there?
No, it is not a hockey hotbed, that's for sure. A buddy of mine termed the phrase, or coined the phrase, Germafricadian. He's a German that was born in South Africa, grew up in Canada, and works in the U.S. So I'm officially American now. But no, my parents were they were in the hotel industry, and Johannesburg is where they started out, and they got married there, and I came along shortly after, and my dad got transferred quite a bit. We ended up going to Copenhagen for a year, and then when I was about 4, he got transferred to Edmonton. And as a guy growing up in Germany, he didn't really play the game of hockey. He obviously played more soccer, but he always, when the Olympics were on, he always enjoyed watching the game of hockey. And
Mm-hmm.
moving
Well,
to
that was back when we had the great East and West German
oh yeah,
rivalry too.
yeah, we had the Iron Curtain and everything. But he, when we got to Edmonton, obviously, in Canada, you're born with skates. As soon as you're born, you got skates on. So he got me involved in hockey, and anybody that grew up playing minor hockey in Edmonton knows that you start out playing in the outdoor rinks, and so that's where I started. January, middle of the night in Edmonton. It's not balmy, that's for sure. So so he got me started, and it's really kind of, I enjoyed the game. The only thing I didn't enjoy, back when you're that age, everybody has to have a rotation in net. And when
Mm-hmm.
when it was my turn to go in net, I was standing there, and it was so cold. There wasn't a chance in hell that I wanted to get hit by the puck. So as soon as this kid had a breakaway on me, I went and hid behind the net because I did not want to get hit with this puck. And so it's kind of ironic that I ended up having such a great career in the NHL as a goalie. But yeah, not when you're 4 years old. You want to get hit with a frozen puck. I don't think you want to get hit with a frozen puck at any age.
So, you mentioned, youth hockey, that they have the rotation, but at what point were you like, you know what, goalie is where I want to be. I don't want to skate out anymore. I want to be the last line of defense.
Yeah, so I think I was playing Pee Wee hockey, and I was a defenseman. And we had a game, and our goalie, for whatever, I don't know if his folks got in a car accident or something, he didn't make the game, and they needed somebody to fill in, and I volunteered, and ended up having a great game. I had a shutout, and everybody's patting you on the back. And after that game, I thought, you know what, this isn't a bad idea. This is kind of cool. And it wasn't until I got shelled that I maybe thought, well, maybe this isn't such a good idea. But that right around when I was 10 years old is when I started playing goal consistently.
Yeah, it's funny on how young goalies, they all like at those early games when they play well, and they're like, yeah, this is fun. And then you get that game where you get shelled, and you start second guessing your life decisions.
That's when you start developing thick skin at that age.
Exactly. But you stuck with it, and obviously it was a good decision to stick with goalie. But when you're playing junior hockey, you did something I think even still goalies are dreaming of. But back when you did it, it was kind of a pipe dream. Sure, Ronnie Hexall had done it, but you took the net puck from behind the net and sent it to the other end and put it between the wickets and scored a goal. And I watched the video, the whole bench, they came out and mobbed you, but I'm not going to ask the silly question of were you aiming for that goal, because clearly you were with the way you shot it. But in that situation, were you thinking worst case scenario, I clear the zone, or did you really think you had that chance?
I was going for it. I grew up a Hextall fan. I was actually using, at the time, I was using Hextall's Victoriaville pattern. And back in the day, I handled it pretty well, the puck. And I'd like to say I threw it 10 feet in the air and it landed at center ice and went in, but I actually got it about 2.5 feet off the ice. One of my forwards actually had to lift his leg in order for the puck to go by him. And then it just curled on the inside of the left post. But the funny part about that story is that that was the year that I went to my first NHL training camp, made the team out of camp, was there for about a month before I got sent back to junior. And when I was back to junior, I went back with not a bad attitude. I went back with the wrong attitude. I thought, hey, I made the NHL. I should be able to stop everybody down here. And you realize pretty quick that guys in the NHL know how to do their job, and the guys in the Western League do not. And so I'd be more aggressive on shots, and I'd be getting beat backdoor, and I just wasn't having any success. So this was one of my brighter nights. I think I'd stopped 35, 40 shots. I had an assist. I had a roughing penalty. I ended up scoring a goal, and the bench cleared, like you said. And
you had a Gordie Howe hat trick.
Had a Gordie for a goal. Had a Gordie Howe hat trick. And so the next day, it made George Michael's Sports Machine, which back in the day was a big.
Yeah, I remember that
highlight show deal on NBC, and so the next day I got a call from our director of player personnel, Jack Button. And Jack, if anybody know who Jack was, he passed away a number of years ago, but Jack was a pretty no BS kind of guy, and so he called me up and he said, "Hey, I heard you had a pretty special night last night." I go, "Yeah, Jack, it was awesome. I had an assist. I got a roughing penalty, scored a goal, guys, cleared the benches." He goes, "Oh, no, I watched it, on George Michael's Sports Machine. That's pretty cool and everything." But he goes, "The last time I checked, we drafted you to stop the puck, not score goals. And so far this year, you haven't done a very good job of that." And I tell you, that brought me down to earth so quickly. I don't think I handled the puck the rest of the year. And it was a pretty sobering conversation, but anyway, couldn't take that special night away from me. And yeah, it'll always be a part of history because I'm the first Western League to do it.
Yeah, no, leave it to a coach to rain on a parade like that. One of those crazy moments that every goalie dreams of. But do you think, like you said, you were sent down with, as you said, the wrong attitude and talking about letting young players mature in the minors? Do you think that experience, having done it yourself, has helped you deal with some of these younger players in your current position and knowing how to talk to them?
100%. I think I've gone through every phase a professional ice hockey player could go through. First round draft pick, made the NHL out of training camp, got sent back to junior, didn't see the NHL again for another 4 or 5 years. Spent a little bit of time in the East Coast League. Won a championship at the East Coast League level, at the American League level. Didn't have a lot of success early in my NHL career. It took me a while before I got my first win. And then I went on an unbelievable run. The first year I became a starter, we went to the Stanley Cup Finals. I played in a couple All-Star games. I won a Vezina Trophy. I mean, I ran the gamut. And so when I talk to these kids, I'm like, there's not a thing you can tell me that I haven't experienced. And I think the kids really appreciate it because it comes from a guy that literally has experienced it all. And so when I'm talking to them, I'm not, blowing smoke up their butt. I'm actually letting them know, what to expect, or, this is the reason why we're doing it.
Hmm.
And, more times than not, the guys appreciate it.
Well, and like you said, having been through it, it helps you connect with them. You understand the emotion, so that when you do talk to them, it's not just lip service. Um,
Well, and the other thing is too now, and they tell them too, because now you're on the other side of the door, and I tell them, as a player, you always think you're getting screwed by the coach. Coach has got it out for you, and I say, well, that's the exact opposite. Every player has a plan. There's a plan for every player in the organization, and because we're sending you to the coast, or because we're sending you to the American League, or because we're sending you back to junior, there's a reason why. It's not because we don't like you. It's not because we don't think you can play. Every player has a different developmental um, projection, and some guys
mhm.
develop quicker, some guys takes a little longer, and so we tell them, hey, we're because we're sending you to the coast doesn't mean we're forgetting about you. There's a reason why we're sending you to the coast, and then you explain to them why, and so they get a better understanding. They come into the meeting a little bitter, a little down, a little like, I don't know what's going on, and then they leave the meeting with a little bit better, feeling a little bit better about themselves and the reason why we did it.
Well, and I think more goalies are starting to realize, you know, if they're 3 or 4 on the depth chart and you send them to the coast, it's not because you don't like them; it's because they're going to play more at the coast than if they were at the AHL or skating with the big club. They're not just that healthy scratch every game. They're going to get the games, and
Yeah.
I think that understanding is starting to filter down through goalies. I remember when my nephews were trying out for teams, and they would be that bubble kid, and they wanting to make the A team, and they make the B team, and I go, "Wouldn't you rather be on the B team?" They go, "No, I want to be on the A team." So why? You're gonna be that fourth line guy, rarely seeing the ice when it counts. I said on the B team, you're gonna be the guy. You're
Yeah,
gonna
and
get
then
that ice time, and
when you do make the A team, you're gonna have a more prominent
yeah,
role. Yeah.
yeah, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't think of it that way." And it's like, well, maybe that's what the coaches were thinking. It's better for your progression to be that guy on the B team, and I think more and more kids are starting to understand that, but not to the level they should.
No, no, and I don't think they ever will. I mean,
No,
it's when you get drafted, obviously your first thought is making the NHL, and you want to get there as quickly as possible. And I explained to them, hey, I was a first round pick, and it took me 7 years before I became a number one goalie. So,
yeah.
just it takes time, and just bide your time, and learn as much as you can, and develop, and if you're good enough, you're going to play.
Yeah, it's hard once they get a taste for that game day buffet. It's hard for them to go back.
Ooh, and the charter flights and all the staying
Yeah,
at the Ritz-Carlton and you name it. Yeah.
yeah. Once they get a taste of that, it's like how do you go back from there? Um, and when I look back at your time in the NHL and kind of when you came up, I mean, we talk about guys in front of you. I mean, there was a guy by the name of Don Beaupre playing for the Capitals, during your early time with the organization. It's like no wonder that they hid you down in the minors for a while, because he was no slouch by any means.
No, he it was probably some of his best years of goal playing for Washington, and I really got to appreciate Donnie. Um, he was one of those veterans that never felt threatened. We would talk. He would kind of guide me around, and I got a lot of respect for Don Beaupre, obviously as a goalie and what he's done, but more so as a person.
I was going to ask if he kind of helped be a mentor and kind of. Uh, I think it was Yogi Berra talked of his predecessor with the Yankees when he said he taught me his experience. So did Donnie teach you his experience best he could?
To an extent, yeah. It was more what to expect as a pro, and what you need to do, and preparing you for getting sent down. Um, which at the time I didn't think I was going to get sent down. I mean, I made it at 19 years old in the NHL, and that's the last thing I thought of. But when I did get sent down, I did listen to what he had to say, and um, no, he was, like I said, he was great. And when I came back to the next training camp, we talked and, asked how my year went and, why did the year go the way it went and this and that. And so we always had good conversations.
Yeah, and I'm sure because your role, you're aware that his son Connor is the Minnesota Wild e-bug these days. So the family's still in the game a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah. In fact, I had Connor on the
Yeah. No, I
podcast.
heard
Gosh,
that. It's great.
Yeah, when I first early on in the podcast, and Connor's a fun guy. I've been talking to him. It's like, we got to get your dad on the podcast, and it hasn't happened yet, but it will. But being up here in Minnesota, I love flying out of Terminal 2 because they got a nice little Wild bar, and they got Don's Capitals mask actually in a case at the bar there. And, yeah, and
Oh, I've never been in there.
How as a goalie do I not?
Yeah.
How do I not go by that bar just to look at the goalie masks?
Well, I'll remember to go next time I'm in the airport and I got a little bit of a layover to find that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in Terminal 2, so it's, unless you're flying Southwest or Sun Country, you got to take the tram over to that one, but it's worth the tram ride. Just for the Wild themed bar.
Why not? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I just liked when I was talking to Connor, and he was saying that when they had the Stadium Series here, and the Wild reached out to his dad, and he's like, well, I don't know. He thought he was too old for it. And he goes, 10 minutes later, does Gil Moak call him up saying, yeah, I'm going to play. Are you going to play? And he goes, at that point, he kind of felt pressured into playing. If Moak was playing, how could he say no?
He played a few years ago. We had the outdoor game. We had a veterans game.
Yeah.
Not veteran, an alumni game against Pittsburgh. When we played in Pittsburgh, I forget what it was, number 2015, 14, something like that. I remember Donnie played for the Caps. I haven't, and I won't either. I haven't put the pads on since my last game. I've had too many surgeries, and I know once I'm in the net, I get competitive again, and I don't want to do something where I'm going to have to go back under the knife to repair what I tore.
Have you thought about being like Eddie Belfour or some of these other goalies who you don't play goalie, but you skate out?
Oh, I do.
Okay.
I'll do an alumni. We'll do an alumni thing at development camp, and I'll be like a stay-at-home defenseman or power forward. I do that for sure.
With the Stadium Series game in Raleigh this year, are they going to have an alumni game there?
I haven't heard. They didn't have one. They didn't have one when we played Toronto at Naval Academy, and we didn't have one when we played Chicago and DC. So I'm not sure if they're not getting, which I find hard to believe because we do have a lot of alumni that do play in these games.
Mm-hmm.
So I know Chicago's alumni is huge. Maybe. Well, obviously Toronto's is huge. I'm not sure about why Carolina or why we're not having it.
Yeah, well, that's a game I'm looking forward to because my dad actually lives just east of Wilmington, 2 hours away on one of the coastal islands, and he's like, "All right, I've got tickets. You need to fly in, bring the boy," and so I'm planning on being at that game in February.
Well, that'll be fun.
Fun.
It won't be too cold, but it'll be nice.
No, because my folks were in town this last year over the Winter Classic in Minnesota, and I thought about getting tickets. I had them in the cart, and I was ready to hit, purchase, but I was like, God, $2,000 for 3 tickets to sit outside in January in Minnesota. I'm like, I don't know. And it's going to look really good on my 80-inch flat screen in the front room where it's warm. And so I chose not to, and that was the right choice since it was like 20 below zero. But dad went to the game at Wrigley. I had tickets to that one as well, but my son was just born and decided probably not best to leave my wife home with 2 young children on New Year's Day to go out of town. Yeah. So I'll be going to the one in Raleigh though, and that'll be fun. And like you said, probably not too cold. As a Minnesotan, I might be the fool out there in a sweatshirt because I'll think it's balmy at that time of year. But yeah, that'll be fun though. I'm looking forward to it. So
Yeah,
as you mentioned,
you might actually be wearing a tank top.
maybe, who knows? Especially if the beer is flowing, who knows? I
Well, it
don't
could
think
be.
they're going to have
Listen,
to. I don't think they're going to have to worry about the beer freezing in the cans like they did in Minneapolis this year.
ooh,
Yeah, there were
beer
pictures of
freezing that
people.
cold? Oh,
Yeah, there were pictures of people with their cans of beer, and it was just like slush frozen over.
that's
Because it was,
cold.
like I said, it was 20 below plus wind chill. Um, but my son was a Boy Scout, and they said there's no such thing as too cold, just underdressed.
True, true. I guess
Uh,
I would not. I would have found a way to not play in that game. That's for sure. That would have brought me back to my Edmonton days, hiding behind the net and not wanting to get hit by the puck.
yeah, I'm glad I didn't go. So you'd mentioned Vesno winner, two-time Olympian, all of that good stuff. But again, for the Olympics, you competed for Germany. You kept that German citizenship for all those years, so that you could compete for Germany. Um, was that more for your parents? What was the thought process behind that, and not trying to go out for Team Canada?
So we never became. I'm not sure why we never became Canadian. We are always considered landed immigrants in Canada. So I'd always had the German passport. I'd never. I mean, that was back when the NHL they didn't have their players playing in the Olympics, so it never even dawned on me that maybe one day it'd be a possibility. Um,
Yeah.
but the year I got drafted in '89, I actually got invited to the Canadian World Junior hockey team's training camp in Kitchener in the summer, and so I was there for the whole week. And at the end of the camp, we were in a classroom and we're filling out visa applications because I think it was in Czechoslovakia at that time. That's where the tournament was going to be held. So we were filling out these forms, and I put my hand up, called the guy over, and I said, "Hey, I've got too many numbers on my passport for the slot that you guys have here." And he's like, "Oh." So I handed him my passport and everything, and he goes, "You're German?" I go, "Yeah." I go, "I've always been German." And they came knocking on my dorm door about 20 minutes later and said, "Well, I'm sorry, you're ineligible to play for us. We had no idea you were German." I'm like, "Yeah." I go, "Well, thanks for the t-shirt and the shorts," and that was that. But yeah, because just I think everybody assumed because I grew up in Canada that I'd have a Canadian passport, and it just my parents never applied for it. Well,
But
then it was
then,
obviously, then when the Olympics came around, um, I had a green card in the U.S. I really didn't have any thoughts of getting my U.S. citizenship, and then the Olympics came around, and I actually had to tell somebody. So Stefan Ustorf, who's the guy that we drafted from Germany, came to camp, and we were talking. And I told him, I'm German, and he's like, "Oh, that's yeah." He goes, "I heard about you. You're growing up in Canada and this and that." I go, "No, I'm German." He goes, "What do you mean you're German?" I go, "Well, I have a German passport." He goes, "You have a German passport?" I go, "Yeah." So he got on the phone with somebody from the national team. 2 weeks later, I got the call to go play in the World Cup of Hockey. So it's funny, nobody really knew what my nationality was. Like in the proper country, like Canada thought I was Canadian, Germany thought I was Canadian. Yeah. So anyway, the rest was history. After I went and played in the World Cup in '96 and played in Nagano in '98. I think I played in the World Championships in '97. I got invited to play in Salt Lake, but I hurt my knee right before the Olympics, so I fortunately didn't play there. But then I played in Italy in 2002? No, 2004. No, 2006.
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, 2006. Yeah. So
But and
I was
then
hoping to stick around, be available for the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver, but my body said you'd had enough, and unfortunately I had to retire.
Yeah, so sometimes the body tells us, the mind says we can still do it, and the body goes, "But can you? Can you really?"
Yeah. Yeah,
But you
for
had
sure.
mentioned, now you're a U.S. citizen. What made you want to get that citizenship?
Well, I think it's more for family, estate planning. I've got 3 kids that were born in the US. My wife's American. It just made, I was done playing hockey for Germany.
Yeah,
It just made sense for all the right reasons.
right. No, that makes sense. Um, and so, you can pick on the Canadians now because you never had that Canadian citizenship too.
Well, I still
um,
cheer for the Canadians, and I cheer for both. And then, when they play in the finals, I just kind of become neutral and just hope for a good game.
well, and having talked to, guys that have played in the NHL, in your shoes, you almost stop cheering for teams and you start cheering for individuals and just good play.
Unfortunately, I'm still employed by the Cap, so I've got to cheer for them. But
Well, yeah,
no,
yeah,
you're right. You're right.
exactly.
I mean, I enjoy. The game of hockey is so exciting. Now I'll put on ESPN or TNT at night, and there's always some great matchup, and the games end up being exciting. So, yeah, I'm just a fan of the game. Obviously,
Yep.
Caps are my favorite, but I'm a fan of the game of hockey.
Same. I grew up in Chicago, so the Blackhawks are the team I root for. But if there's a good game on TV, I don't care what level it is, as long as it's a good game. And if it's a rout, I just hope one of the goalies is playing well.
Right. Right.
um, so, uh, got to look at the right notes here. One of the things you started when you were playing was supporting autism awareness. And that was because, as I read, one of your children has autism. So obviously, it was an easy jump for you to get into that. But what has that really meant to you in being able to bring awareness to for autism?
Well, I think it probably one of the more important things that I've done. My son was diagnosed in 2002. He was only 15 months old. Unfortunately, we had a very educated pediatrician that saw some signs when he went in for his 15-month appointment. And at the end of the appointment, he suggested we go to the All Children's Hospital in DC and get a formal diagnosis for autism. And at the time, when you thought of autism, you thought of Rain Man. And
Hmm.
when you hear those words that your son has autism, all of a sudden, all the dreams that you have for him, he's going to follow my footsteps playing hockey and doing all these things that fathers and sons do, and like sort of your dreams sort of get dashed, and um, you're caught in a bit of a nightmare. Well, you
Hmm.
only find out that that's just part of the nightmare. The other half of the nightmare, and probably the toughest part, is trying to figure out what to do for, like, what interventions, what resources do you need to get for your son. And I guess the example I use, and it's not really a good example because one is life threatening, the other isn't. But when you're diagnosed with cancer, the routine, or there's a certain protocol on how to get treated for it. Well, with autism, not all interventions or treatments work the same way for each child. So it's different combinations for each individual child, and trying to find those, especially trying to go on the internet, and you're just overwhelmed. And so I was lucky that I was put in touch with Scott Mellenby, whose son Carter is autistic, and Scott had gone through it, a number of years before I had, and so he kind of was my guide. And he didn't sugarcoat it. He said it was going to be hard. It's going to be probably
Hmm.
the hardest times of your life. But he also said that it's going to be some of the most gratifying. And
Hmm.
um, so anyway, so we started this foundation, the Carson Kolzig Foundation, in wanting to help guide parents in the right direction, because we knew how hard it was ourselves when we were first told about the diagnosis, and maybe try to make it a little less of a nightmare for them.
Hmm.
And with our foundation over the years, we've been able to help fund Responding to Autism Center here in the Eastern Washington State area, um, and that's helped service a lot of kids over the years. We've just started a an adult training class now where these, because when we started the center, we're bringing in these young kids like my son's age. Well, my son's 21 now, and so what do you do when they become adults? So now we're training them and giving them the tools to be able to integrate into the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've had a lot of really good response and a lot of success with it. And at the end of the day, it is, people ask me what's your favorite moment in hockey or memory, and I tell them it's when I won the King Clancy for leadership on and off the ice, and I think, and they ask, oh really, not the Vezina? I go, I mean, it's you recognize Clancy, you're recognized for what you do away from the game, and I think as a person, that's probably more important. So
Mm-hmm.
that is my biggest award as far as the game of hockey is concerned, and again, we're fortunate as athletes. We have a platform where we can do a lot of good. Some of these athletes decide to use their platform for political reasons, and I kind of shake my head with that because I think we can do a lot better, have more of an impact. But to each their own, and I've been happy with what I've been doing.
Well, and to your point, Washington Capital goalies are continuing to give back to the community. It was Darcy Kemper was part of the October Saves program this year in helping raise money for that group, which
Kemp's is
awesome.
He's a world-class guy. Before him, Braden Holtby was so involved in the community. He was a big LGBTQ advocate. He walked in the Pride Parade.
Yep.
He was involved with a lot of things. I would like to say the Caps in general are a great organization in terms of community service and giving back, and I think it speaks volumes about the organization.
Absolutely, and I think we're seeing more hockey players, to your point, focus on causes like that and that aren't necessarily political. It's just things they can do to help raise money for good causes. Which, why wouldn't you?
Or why wouldn't you, try to make someone's life just a little bit better?
Yeah, exactly. As I tell my kids every day when they go to school, be kind. Be kind and do good.
Treat people the way you want to be treated.
Yeah, which I went to Catholic school literally my whole life from preschool through college. So I always had the nuns and the brothers reminding us,
I went from middle school on. Yeah.
Yeah. And, sometimes I joked with the brothers in college, but I was like, those nuns always told us to treat others the way we wanted to be treated, but they were walking around with a ruler and
smacking us with a ruler. Yeah.
So, like, if we did that to them, what would happen to us?
Right. You'd be canceled nowadays.
Yeah, and the brothers found the humor in it, but they always said, "Don't bring that one up to the sisters; they won't find the humor in it."
For sure.
Yeah. So one of the other things I always found, whenever I watch the games on ESPN again, especially when you guys were playing the Bruins, they always brought up your friendship with Brian Defoe and the fact that you two were good buddies and in each other's weddings, all of that. How is it playing against one of your best friends that happens to play for one of your rivals? Because I've played against friends that played for other teams, but they weren't necessarily on my rival. What was it like having him over there?
So the timing, had it have been 15 years earlier, when he was playing for the Portland Winterhawks, I was playing for the Tri-City Americans. I didn't like Byron much back in the late 80s. He was, I always thought he was a very arrogant guy and pretty boy. And so had that situation in Boston happened back then, I think it probably would have been a little bit more physical than the one we had in Boston. But we both got drafted together. We both went over to Russia for our first training camp. We were one of the first NHL teams to do that. And him and I were the only two rookies that went over there. So I went in there not with an open mind, but I figured, all right, I'll give this guy a chance. And we ended up becoming best of friends. And we were roommates for a couple of years. We were best men at each other's weddings. We're godparents to each other's sons. Both of our sons are autistic. So we've got a lot of things in common. but that night was in Boston. We just come off the year before. We went to the finals. We didn't have a very good start to the season. I think we were like 4 or 5 games under 500. The game didn't start out well. We were down 2-0 early. And we had Craig Berube and Dale Hunter and Mark Tenorti. And, they thought they wanted to change the pace of the play a little bit. So I think Don Sweeney went behind the net with the puck, and Craig Berube went right after him. And all of a sudden, it was a 5-on-5 melee. And I remember Jesse Belanger, who was Boston's tough guy, he got into it with Dale, and I felt like I had to help the little guy out, so I skated down and tried to get Jesse off of Hunts. Well, next thing I know, I got Byron on my back. I turn around and I'm like, oh no! And so we started squaring off, and all we did was just kind of dance around a little bit, and we were smiling the whole time. And I remember we were right by Boston's bench, and I remember somebody said, and not the same words I'm going to use here, but you two guys stop smiling and start throwing them. Those weren't the exact words that we used, but and so Byron all of a sudden got a surge, and he grabbed my jersey and he pulled it over my head, and I just remember telling him, Byron, don't you dare. And his credit, he never did, and so we ended up getting the dance broke up, and it wasn't until that summer I had a charity golf tournament here in town, and Byron came, and people got to talking with us, and they asked about the fight and who won, and I said, well, nobody really threw a punch or anything. It was just kind of a dance, and I said Byron really wouldn't, he wouldn't have wanted to have it be a real fight, this and that. And the little bugger pulls out his wallet, and he had this newspaper clipping, and it was from the Boston Globe on the front of the sports page, and it had the exact picture of him having my jersey over my head with his fist cocked, and all he said was, pictures say 1,000 words, so you guys decide on who you think won the fight.
So. What are friends for, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So before I always end every episode with a list of 10 questions I've asked every guest. But before I get to those, I want to touch on one more thing. Your masks. You started out with that great Uncle Sam mask, and then you switched to the Godzilla mask. Did you think that was going to become, one of those iconic masks? We were fortunate as goalies in the 90s to have great masks like yours, Belfour's, Waz, Van Beesbrook, Rickers, Cujo, all these great masks. And yours is one of them. Did you think the first time you saw that mask, it was going to be one of those where, okay, that's the one you got to wear for the rest of your career, and you were going to have other kids replicating? I mean, one of the kids I coached at the high school level had the Zilla mask, in his school colors. It was one of those that other people wanted to replicate. Did you think it was going to be one of those?
I didn't at the time, because I think in order to say you had an iconic mask, I think you have to back it up with your play. And like I said early on, I wasn't playing as well as I eventually did. So the mask obviously didn't get a lot of airtime, but the evolution of that mask. So yeah, the Uncle Sam, I love the Uncle Sam mask. And Godzilla wasn't even in my back of my mind. I was playing my third year pro. I was in Rochester, New York. I'd gotten loaned out playing for Rochester, and I was really, really having a good year. And I remember one home game I came out, and one of the fans had these signs that nobody beats Godzilla. And because I was a fiery player, wore my emotions on my sleeve. If things didn't go my way, sometimes I'd break my stick and, temper tantrum, all this stuff. But so anyway, it just kind of, after that, it just kind of stuck and got shortened to Zilla. And I remember the first version, I was in Portland, Maine. I still had my Uncle Sam mask. And I remember this first version of, we were trying to do something as far as Godzilla. It ended up looking like that cartoon dinosaur Barney. Remember that?
Yeah.
So I'm on the ice wearing it, and my teammates, God bless them, somebody had mentioned it to the guy in charge of the music. So warm-up started. What do you think the first warm-up song was? I love you, you love me. And so I never wore that mask again. So when we had like version 2 came, it wasn't, we probably went through about 4 or 5 versions before that, the fire breathing Godzilla on my forehead was finally the final product. And yeah, like I said, I started having success, went to the finals, and yeah, I was really prideful of that mask. And even when I played that one year in Tampa, I basically incorporated the same logo with palm trees and
Hmm.
something else. But that season was, to me, was a waste of time anyway. And so, um, uh, yeah, it's still hanging up on my wall, but it's not one of my favorite masks. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, I get that. So like you said, I end every episode with, I used to call them rapid fire questions, but sometimes they bring back memories of other stories and they go longer. But I've asked every guest, and you're my 100th guest, the same exact questions every single time. So Eddie Belfour, Kelly Rudy, Ronnie Tugnut, they've all answered the same questions. And the first one is, what's the craziest coaching moment from your playing days where a coach just lost it?
Whew, that's a good one. I would have to say Jim Schoenfeld. We were playing in Pittsburgh in the playoffs in, yeah, what year was it? 96. And we just lost our 4 overtime game 2 nights before, feeling pretty down. We were losing the game in game 6 in Pittsburgh to get eliminated. We had a 5-on-5 brawl. Weird. The Caps getting another brawl. And I remember Shoney was ready to fight everybody on Pittsburgh's bench and challenging everybody in the stands, and then he ended up getting kicked off the bench, and remember waving to all the Pittsburgh fans. I would have to say that would be the craziest ones. I've had some pretty mellow coaches back in the day.
I remember I was at a Blackhawks game, got seats right behind the visiting goaltender, and it was that first row right above the Zamboni entrance. And the Hawks were playing the Panthers. Luongo was starting, so I was excited. I got to see him play for 2 periods, and then the other period it was Jocelyn Thibault, and Mike Keenan was the Panthers coach at the time. Well, he didn't like a call that the refs made, and he threw about 7 or 8 sticks out on the ice during play. And finally, the refs called the play dead so that they could clean up the sticks. But I was shocked they didn't throw him out of the game. It was just like they looked back and was like,
scared of them.
yeah, they're like, well, there's Keenan being Keenan again. Let's just clean up the sticks and carry on. So
I remember, I remember one. Well, my
Yeah.
junior coach, John Oliver. I remember we were at home in Tri-Cities, not playing well, and he didn't snap a lot, but he finally came in the dressing room and wanted to show he was mad. So he went to kick one of those Gatorade jugs that was sitting in the middle of the dressing room. Well, he thought it was empty. Well, it was full of ice, and so he went to kick it, and he ended up breaking 2 toes, and couldn't even have his meltdown moment. He just kind of whimpered off back into the coach's room.
I had the Tampa Bay e-bug on, and he was talking about in juniors. Coach came in before Christmas, upset, goes and kicks the Christmas tree. Same thing. Wound up hurting his foot and, kind of whimpering off.
Christmas tree.
Well, if I remember the story, the coach was pretty much saying he was canceling Christmas. The Christmas break, guys are going to have to stay home, kick the tree, and they wound up going on their Christmas break, from what I remember of that story. So next question, what's your favorite all-time goalie mask? I mean, you had some great ones like we talked about, but there were other great ones, even in the 70s. A lot of people talk about Cheevers and Dryden. What's your favorite?
God, there are so many of them. I'm trying to remember the one. Forget his name. It was almost like it was like it was like well, you remember the mask that oh God, what was the name of the movie? The molded mask where they actually had the mold of the nose, and oh, I'm trying to remember who wore those. One was like it was almost like a wolf man. I'm trying to remember the name of the goalie, not Stevenson. It'll come to me. And then there was one where they had a snake coming through the eye, and
Oh yeah,
I don't know if
I
he
know what
played
one you're
for
talking
the
about.
Seals.
Yep, that one's on all those goalie mask
Yeah,
posters. I
yeah,
know
yeah.
when you're
Those are
talking.
really cool. But you know what? Cujo's is iconic. I thought Jocelyn Thibault's with the headdress was pretty
Yeah,
cool. Eddie's, the Eagle was pretty cool.
yep,
Mike Palmateer's with the
yeah.
staggered. Yeah, that was really sharp.
You know what one I always liked that I thought was underrated? Another Capitals goalie, Rick Tabaracci or Ricci. I always
Oh,
butcher his
Tabby's,
last
yeah.
name.
Tabariki.
With the battle flag.
Yeah.
I just thought that was one of the nicest masks that we didn't see enough of, and it was on the back of a Fleer hockey card. They had a great picture of it. It's like, God, that's just such a
But
perfect
see, that's
mask
the
for
thing.
that
Like,
team.
so Tabby didn't have a lot of success as a Capital, and so that's why you don't see his mask much. So
Yeah,
that's why when you talk about iconic masks, it's usually guys that are successful or that are on TV quite a bit. And unfortunately, at that time, Tabby wasn't. But
yeah.
yeah, no, I know exactly the mask you're talking about.
Yeah, I loved that one. I liked to draw as a kid, and I was always drawing that one. I just thought it
Well,
was.
you know what, and Bopes is pretty iconic too, with the Capitol building
Yep.
on the top. It was pretty sharp.
Yeah, and I remember talking to Connor when his dad went to. Well, first of all, his dad didn't like to have the team logo on the helmets. He felt there was enough of that on jerseys and everything else. He wanted something else, and so he had that great one with the Capitals. And then when he went to Ottawa, the other nation's capital, he goes, well, let's go with the same thing with the Capitol
Parliament,
building,
yeah,
and
Capitol building.
and so it's like, yeah, I didn't really put two and two together, even though I think it was kind of obvious when you look at them. But yeah, two great masks with the same idea but different teams.
Yeah.
And I mean, he had that great one with the North Stars
Minnesota,
too,
yeah.
that people are always kind of replicating here in the Twin Cities. I see at least one or two of those replicas a year playing in the beer leagues here. So what's your favorite rink that you've played at?
My favorite, it's a toss up between the Bell Center and in Montreal and Madison Square Garden. Those are my two favorites. New York, it's iconic arena.
Yep.
I never got a chance to play in the Forum in Montreal. I backed up at Chicago Stadium. That, I mean, and the beginning of the game, Chicago Stadium is the best.
Yes.
In the old stadium with the national anthem and everything. That gave you chills. Yeah, I would say MSG and the Bell Center.
Those are two good ones. You mentioned Chicago Stadium, and I hadn't made it to a Hawks game, and it was their final year. And me and my sister already knew the truth about Santa Claus, so Mom and Dad started wrapping presents as they bought them. So, as soon as they got them and the tree's up, they're under the tree. And there was a small little box, and I wasn't putting two and two together, probably because I had already had too many hockey pucks ahead, but it said to Joseph from Bill Wirtz. And I'm like, what's in here? Well, they were tickets to the Blackhawks game. New Year's Eve, they were playing the Dallas Stars, the last year at the old stadium. So I got to go to a game, and I'm all excited. We're in the lower level, and I'm waiting for Eddie Belfour to come up those stairs first. And Jeff Hackett comes out, and I was so upset. And it was funny because when I had Eddie on, I mentioned it to him. He goes, we were probably feeling the same way because I was upset too because I wanted to play the game. But I wound up going to a few more games before the season was over, and they closed the place, and I got to see him play in person. But it was just funny that, I'm all excited. I get to go to the stadium, and, Billy Crystal talks of his first time going to Yankee Stadium and those old stadiums where, all of the arenas, whether it's baseball, football, whatever, you can walk on the concourse and see the playing field or the rink or whatnot from the concourse. But in those old places, you had to walk through that tunnel, and there was just something about walking through that tunnel and seeing ice that white is like, just something about it, and how big that sheet of ice looked, even though the same size sheet I skated on Southwest Ice Arena. It just looked so big with all those seats around. It was
Well,
magical.
and those old buildings, you felt like the fans were right on top of you too. Not
Yeah.
like new stadiums now where they're fading away from you. There, they were like right on top of you. It was definitely a home ice advantage for the home team.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is your favorite stick that you ever used?
I'd probably say it was probably the Victoriaville one that I used, the Hextall pattern, the white with the black Vic. Um, I mean, I don't think the goalies today could probably lift that stick. It's so heavy compared to what those guys use now. But it was just, it had a huge toe curve.
Hmm.
It had the rounded heel, be able to change the angle of the blade to elevate the puck. Yeah, and it was just, they didn't have many colored sticks back then, and so that was kind of one of the first ones.
Yeah,
And
they were one of the first. I
and
remember
it
that.
had Vic on the paddle part, and it was just,
Yep.
I thought it was an iconic stick.
Yeah. My first goalie stick was a white Vic with orange lettering and black outline around it, and that was the association stick. And so I think a lot of young goalies use those. And one of my favorite sticks is actually a CCM Kolzig pattern. When I was playing college, I loved Christian sticks. And I was the only one at the school still using them. So they stopped ordering them because all the other guys wanted Cohos or CCMs. And back when they put the old block CCM on the whole paddle, they came back to it. We had a bunch of them. It's like, all right, I'll start using these. And I loved that thing. It was great. I wish I could still find them, but it was one of my favorite,
So
one of the
that
better
Christian one,
ones.
was that the one with the Curtis curve?
They did make the Curtis curve. I liked the Belfour pattern. In fact, my all-time favorite stick is actually a Cooper Reactor 5 Belfour because it was a light stick for being a wood stick, but most of those wood sticks, I guess you could almost say the paddle is almost like a football in that it was rounded, whereas that Reactor was more flat. And I just
Right.
liked the way I could handle, hold on to it at that shoulder there. And I think some of the sticks are getting back to that flat
Yeah.
front, and I like it. Um, but I still love the wooden sticks. A little bit of weight behind it. I like it because then I know I'm keeping the stick on the ice.
Yeah.
Um,
It was actually one of our, I'm trying to remember who it was, Clay Stevenson, I think, one of our prospects. He's got this new Bauer stick. I can't get over how light it is. They've
mhm.
really limit the amount of material they have on the paddle. It looks like the outline of a regular stick on the back. It's
Yeah,
crazy. It's like it just takes nothing to lift these things.
yeah,
I
and
don't like because I need a feel. Like I need to have that. It's like a golf club. I can't have a golf club that's too light. I have to kind of know where it is. You know?
yeah, yeah. Well, I remember, like I said, my association stick was a Vic, but the first stick that I owned was a Titan, and my first
Red
year
one,
playing, it was a white one with
white
teal
with the red
lettering.
lettering.
Ours had the teal, mine had the teal
Oh,
lettering, and I
teal.
had to have it because my first team was the Sharks, and it matched our jerseys. But it was a senior Titan, and I was a squirt goalie, so I show up to my goalie camp, and my
Your
arms
hands
up
like
like
this.
this. The thing is, and my goalie coach just looks at it, he's like, "That thing is a log," and I still have the stick to this day with the teal tape that went halfway up the paddle, just like Hasek used to do. And my goalie coach is like, I'm not going to tell you need a new stick because they're expensive and you just got one. He goes, but when you do get a new one, don't get one this big.
Right.
But because of that, I still like having that. I like the bigger paddles. I don't need a 27-inch paddle. I'm probably a 25-inch paddle guy height wise, but I like that taller paddle because of that. Playing back then with that elbow way up high and just that super heavy stick. I don't
Well,
like the new ones because of that.
it probably forced you to play more upright too, have more of a presence.
It
You
should
know?
have, but I'm not going to say I played more upright, but it should have.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so, what's your favorite youth hockey memory?
Favorite youth hockey memory. Probably. Oh, there's two. The one year in Bantam when we won the Purelator Cup, which is national championship for Canada, and then in midget qualifying for the Air Canada Cup, which I think it's called the TELUS Cup now. again, qualifying for the national championship. We didn't win that year, but because I was playing in the Maritimes, I wasn't really a sought after junior recruit. So
Mm-hmm.
we ended up going with that team to Air Canada Cup, which is being held in Ottawa, and I got some. I was seen by a lot of teams, and then I got listed by the New Westminster Bruins back in the day. Now they're the Tri-City Americans. And now I live in Tri-Cities. I own the Americans. And so it's kind of come full circle. But yeah, the one reason we won is as a Bantam, and then the second one as a midget because it brought me here to Tri-Cities. So
That's a good reason. So the next question is, what is the best chirp you've heard on the ice, off the ice, directed at you, not directed at you? This one always gets some people because they're like, what can I say?
God, there's so many good ones, and my memory is terrible now. Oh my God. I might have to go back to that one. I might have to think about that one.
We can come back to it because the next question is, what's the worst post-game beer you've had?
Beer?
Yeah, worst post-game beer.
Is there such a thing as a bad beer? As a post-game beer?
To me, the only bad post-game beer is a warm beer. I'll still drink it, but it doesn't mean it's good.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, like a Mick Ultra. To me, that's like carbonated water. That's not considered a beer. No, I would say that.
Yeah.
But technically, there's really not a bad beer after a game.
No, and I've said before, those cheap domestic light beers are almost the best because they're not as close to water as Mick Ultra, but they're crisp enough, but still mostly water, where it's just a good refreshing.
Not as filling. Yeah.
Yeah. Then you go into the parking lot and you have the better beers, but
right, the IPAs and the stouts and the
I showed up for a beer league game. I was filling in about 2 years ago, and somebody offered me a pregame beer, which, okay, one pregame beer every now and then, it's nice, relaxes you. But they tossed over a stout that was like a 7.8%, and I just looked at him and said, I'm going to save this for after the game because I want to see only one puck.
I was going to say.
Yeah, it's like, and I gave the person grief. I was like, who brings a stout for pregame beers? Like, seriously, come on. It's the heaviest beer you can have. And that person learned after that game.
I probably think you needed to carb up for the game.
Yeah, exactly. So when you taped your stick, did you go heel to toe or toe to heel?
Toe to heel.
Okay, so you're in the minority. Why did you go toe to heel?
Not really any reason. It just became a habit.
Yeah,
I just found it easier to start from the toe and go to the heel. No rhyme or reason.
Because I use those Christian sticks that always, they just absorbed water in those heels and always just started to become a sponge. So you'd throw some wood glue in there, throw it in the vise. I always started at the heel because it's like, if I'm going to mess up anywhere in my tape job, it's going to be at the heel. Because you always had to go over the heel with those old Christians. Right. So what was your favorite number to wear and why?
I would say, well, I mean, it ended up being 37, and I kind of,
yeah.
The only reason I wore 37, again, is because of Don Beaupre. I wore 33 when I was growing up. I was a big Patty Waugh fan. Other players on the team had 27, so I couldn't wear that for Hexie. And then when I came to Washington, I wore 33 in junior, and then when I came to Washington, obviously Donnie had it. They gave me 35, and I did not like number 35, and I didn't want number 1, and so I just looked at the numbers, and 37 just seemed to fill the jersey out.
Yeah,
and it just kind of stuck.
It worked.
It wasn't really any rhyme or reason.
Yeah, it worked, and in fact, when I was coaching high school hockey, 37 was the number our starting goalie at the time had, and he actually wound up in Capitals prospect camp a number of years ago, probably 10, 15 years ago. But that's what he wore, and because of him, all the kids coming up for a couple of years had to wear that if they were the starting goalie because we only bought jerseys every couple of years, and we didn't have 30 or 35 because he chose that one. It's like, all right, all these younger goalies were a little upset with him for a while.
That's cool. What's his
So
name?
Dustin Carlson, he is with Ohio State now as one of their volunteer coaches and works with their goalies.
Okay.
Yeah, nice kid. When I coached him his senior year, and as I told him, I really didn't want to do much to him because he kind of was set in his ways already, and he was good. So I was gonna not break him. That was my my goal with him. He didn't need much coaching at that point. So the last question before we circle back to that chirp one is, what advice do you have for young goalies?
For young goalies, just have fun, enjoy the game. There'll be a time where you need to make a decision whether you want, how serious you're going to take it, and then that's when obviously you got to become a little bit more regimented and working out and studying the game more. But at this level, just have fun, because if you take it too serious now, it's not going to be fun for you in the future.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely. And fall in love with the game because you're having fun. And then once you love the game and you're still having fun and you do become more regimented, it's still fun to you because you love it.
Right. You become a student of the game, and you want to try to be the best at the position. And so there's other things that motivate you when you're older, but when you're young, you just have fun. You're playing a game. That's all it is,
Well, here I am knocking on the door. I'm 42, and I'm still a student of the game for my beer league games. I guarantee my teammates aren't watching Wild games going, oh, maybe I should pay a little more attention to this in my next beer league game. No, they're not. But us beer league goalies, we're always watching, trying to better our game.
Well, the game's always evolving, right? The position is always evolving. Players up front, they're getting better. The shots are getting better. And the position's getting there's always something different that
well, you talk about the evolving. We mentioned sticks earlier, but just the equipment, how far it has come from the late 90s to today. I mean, you try giving a kid goalie equipment from the late 90s and they're going to laugh at you.
Or the late 80s with the deer hair and the good luck. You're talking about absorbing water. Whew.
Yeah, my first chest protector was a 2-piece. Why they gave us a chest protector? Because it didn't offer any protection. They gave us some false sense of protection in those pads that were 3 times the weight after a game. Thank God we had hot water heat in our house with the radiator in the basement, because after a game I would lean those pads against that radiator. And that was the only way they would dry out, was against that radiator.
We did the same thing. And if I had mistakenly left them in the car overnight, they'd be frozen.
Yep. Yeah. It was just crazy. Those pads, and the old waffle board without the curve on the top that became so big in the 90s, and that first baseman mitt. It was, you really learned how to catch a puck.
Cooper 31 ST, or it actually, the cheater, it was actually webbed. It wasn't just a part of the glove and the cuff, but it was actually just a separate webbing. It was pretty neat.
Yeah. And I loved when Jeff Hackett had that great Vaughn catch glove with Chicago, where he kept that webbing cheater, even though they had the solid one, he still had kind of that web.
Oh, and he had a wide, like his glove was open.
Patch was. Yeah. I loved Belfour as a goalie as a kid, but when they traded him and I got to watch Hackett every away game, because the Blackhawks home games still weren't on TV at that point, he was just so fun to watch. He was a pretty good technical goal. I mean, he was a good goalie for a young goalie to watch. That's for sure.
For sure.
But he gets another credit. Yeah, another great helmet with that headdress that he had. His nod to Darren Payne always let it be known that he had that idea first. But I think Hackett's mask painter pulled it off a little bit nicer.
For sure.
But so I'll circle back to that question we skipped. The best chirp you heard.
Man, this isn't one of the best ones, but it's a pretty funny. As you got older and you start playing against these young guys that come into the league, 19, 20. and they get a little, they get a little cocky or whatever, and you ask them, how old your mom, or what's your mom's name, and how old is she, and then you look at them and go, I knew we looked familiar. And they just kind of sit there and they kind of don't get it at first. And then they realize that, your mom might have been the age when I was playing junior hockey, so anyway, but there's just so many, there's just so many of them, like, and I can't put one together or think of one. Cause I mean, they were just, man, what were some of the funny ones the other guys said?
I think the best one was David Hutchinson of In Goal magazine. He was talking about one of his son Maddie's goalie coaches at one of the workouts. Looked at him and said, "You must be really good at dodgeball."
I've heard that one before. Our coaches say that in between periods sometimes when our goalies aren't playing well.
Yeah, but that's probably been my favorite one thus far.
Yeah.
Is you must be really good at dodgeball. One of the other good ones I heard, and this wasn't on the podcast, but Sean Podine, his cousin was one of my neighbors, and so they were at some family gathering, and Sean was telling the story after he was traded from Colorado. I forget where he went from Colorado, but all the guys knew he loved his dog, and his dog's name was Buddy. And so he's skating by the bench, and out of nowhere he hears, "Buddy's a homosexual." And he goes, "That's just," he didn't know how to respond to that, because it's like, it's a dog. Like, what, it wasn't offensive by any means, but like, it's a dog. How do you know
How do you chirp a
their
dog?
preference? Like, yeah, how do you, he goes, so that at that, his shift was over. He just had to go back to the bench because he lost all focus after that one. Because it was just like, don't pick on my dog for one, but
chirp a dog. I mean, come on,
yeah. Yeah, but it was like, okay, that's a good one. Like, not in a mean way, just like stating a fact. It's like, all right, well done. Yeah, those are always the good ones. But we've been talking a while. I thank you for your time. It's been fun chatting. When the game brings you through Minneapolis, or let me know. Or if you're going to be out in Raleigh for that outdoor game, let me know. We'll try and connect.
Yeah, for sure. I got your info.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's been fun, and we'll keep in touch.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Bye now.
Take care.